Next on, we have presentation Thames Valley Flood Scheme. Sorry, I don't have a name against this, so.
Hi, thank you. Yes, it's Jules Savage here, and I've got Lizzie with me as well. So yeah, thank you for having us. We both work on Thames Valley Flood Scheme. I'm Communications and Engagement Manager, and Lizzie works in my team. So we're going to share a quick presentation for you, and then happy to take any questions afterwards.
And sorry, Juliet, is when you say you work for Thames Valley Flood Scheme, is that with the EA?
With the Environment Agency, yes. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So, I'm sure everyone's aware across the Thames Valley, there's been a long history of flooding, and the Thames Valley Flood Scheme is looking at how we can help to manage that flood risk into the future. The Environment Agency and partners have done a lot of work already across the catchment to help to manage that. A lot of the work that we've done so far has been locally where the flooding happens. And on this map here, you can see the green dots show areas where we've got flood schemes in place already. Thames Valley Flood Scheme will be looking to work at a catchment scale, and it will be looking to complement those existing flood schemes and also to complement any planned flood schemes that we have, such as the Oxford Flood Alleviation Scheme and the River Thames Scheme. So it is needed in addition to those, and it will help to complement those schemes into the future. As we know with climate change, that flood risk is going to become more and more frequent. We know that we'll get more extreme weather and we'll likely get bigger flooding events as a result. So Thames Valley Flood Scheme isn't only looking at flood risk. We're also looking at other benefits that we can get at the same time. You can see some of those outlined on the diagram here. They include things like improving biodiversity and creating better green spaces for people and for wildlife. So what have we done so far? To start with, we looked at 17 different approaches across the catchment, and these range from anything from really local interventions, such as putting floodgates on houses, right up to flood storage and everything in between. We went out to consult on those 17 approaches, and listening to public feedback, we added in 3 extra approaches that you can see just circled in orange at the bottom there. We then assessed these 20 approaches to see which of those would work at a catchment scale and would reach meet the objectives of our project. And from that, we've identified 2 different groups to take forward. One is flood storage, which there's 2 different types of flood storage that we're looking at, which I'll talk to you about quickly in a minute. And then the other is natural flood management. Now, since our very initial look at what could work on its own to manage flood risk across the catchment, we now know that flood storage will likely have to be a big part of the scheme, but we're looking at how natural flood management could be used to complement natural flood storage. But unfortunately, natural flood management on its own wouldn't be enough to gain the flood risk reduction that we're going to need. So there's 2 different types of flood storage that we're looking at. One is online flood storage and the other is offline flood storage. Of online flood storage, you put embankment in line with a tributary, and you have a control structure on the tributary, and we hold water back behind that embankment at times when flooding is expected to slow the flow and reduce the impact on houses downstream. Offline flood storage is slightly more complicated and is less likely to be a part of the scheme because you have to move water away from the river, store it in a separate place, and then allow it to come back into the river. So it involves more intervention, and the topography of the land has to be right for it to work. But that's not to say that there might not be there. So there may be places where offline flood storage would be appropriate, but on the whole, it's online flood storage that we're looking at. And just to give you an example of what a flood storage area could look like, this is the Banbury flood storage area. On the embankments, we do have to keep grasses cut short because we need to be able to inspect them to make sure they're safe. But beyond that, there's opportunity for improved biodiversity and changes in farming techniques. We would need a control structure, and there's an example shown here, but we don't know yet what control structures would look like on the Thames Valley flood scheme. This is just an example. And I'm now going to hand over to Lizzie, who's going to talk to you a little bit about natural flood management.
Yes, so in terms of natural flood management, we have identified those 5 broad types of natural flood management, which we are currently exploring further. These were all considered as having potential to provide a contribution to managing flood risk at a catchment scale. We have been investigating how natural flood management could work in the Thames catchment, and to do this, we have defined the 5 scenarios shown in green boxes. To start off with, the first is the maximum natural flood management across the catchment, using it primarily to maximize the contribution it can make to managing flood risk. However, our investigations have already shown that it is not feasible, and therefore we are looking at how we can incorporate NFM, natural flood management, in combination with the flood storage approaches as the strategic flood risk solution. The 5th scenario at the bottom looks at a minimum use of natural flood management for the project, so it will mitigate any impacts of the scheme based on flood storage. And in between, we then have 3 middle ground scenarios. Number 2, where the natural flood management component of a project would be many smaller interventions dispersed across the catchment. The 3rd scenario is the opposite of this, which is a smaller number of larger areas of natural flood management. And then the 4th scenario is the one driven by available funding opportunity. If particular wider benefits are being funded by others, that could influence the type of interventions we prioritize. And we've started looking at each of these scenarios, and we'll keep you updated as it progresses. Next slide. Now, the main challenge for the Thames Valley flood scheme, especially in terms of natural flood management, starts with the size. We are looking at an area of over 10,000 kilometers squared. And we also have to consider the way that the catchment floods. The majority of flooding happens when soil is already saturated, and given that natural flood management works by allowing infiltration into the soil, when the soil is already saturated, there's no space for it to infiltrate, and that limits its effectiveness in our catchments. We also have to look at topography, geology, soil characteristics, along with land uses when we're considering natural flood management. In the Thames catchment, we have a large range of geologies, from permeable chalks and sandstones to impermeable clays. In terms of topographies, we have floodplains all the way to rolling hills. And then in terms of land use, we have agroforestry all the way to urban towns and cities. So we've been doing more detailed work on natural flood management, and in that we identified a long list of more detailed approaches expanding out from our 5 approaches. And we are now narrowing that list down and mapping where those different types of natural flood management will be most effective. To maximize the benefits of these approaches, we do need to work with a range of partners to bring together the specialist knowledge, the willing landowners, and those people and organizations who work across the various catchments. And finally, just to give an example of a mosaic approach to natural flood management, which is one of the scenarios I described previously, with a variety of natural flood management approaches working together and scattered across the tributaries. And I'll hand back over to Jules.
Thank you. The Thames Valley Flood Scheme is a project for the future. It is because it's so large, it will take a certain amount of time to put it all together. And the timescales shown on here, we have deliberately put 2025 plus to be a little bit vague, because at the moment we can't give accurate figures on timescales, because at the moment we're still working out exactly what Thames Valley Flood Scheme will look like. So at the moment, the stage that we're in is refining down to work out what our preferred options are. As I already mentioned earlier, it's looking likely that flood storage and natural flood management will be a large part of the scheme, but we still need to do further modelling, and we also want to work with partners, communities and landowners to help us in refining exactly what it will be. And we want to work with people now while we're still in that early stage, so that people have the opportunity to help us develop that together to find something that works for everybody. And we've got a website. If you're interested in knowing more, please do have a look and check out our website. I think when I put this slide together, we had a survey open, which unfortunately is now closed, but there will be more surveys that are coming up soon, so please do keep a lookout. And if you're not already signed up to our newsletter, our email address is on there. Do sign up for regular updates and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. And I will now pass over to everyone if there's any questions. I can see one hand already. Anne, would you like to ask your first question?
Is that me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Okay. So I've got an old enough memory to remember that upstream storage, upstream intervention methods were completely dismissed as part of the Oxford flood scheme. So you've clearly had a volte-face, a complete change of tack, which is fine. It seems to me, you know, those splits, the flood storage online or offline, they're basically hard engineered schemes in all but name. I mean, I'm working on one down in Essex, which is very similar. It's on the River Blackwater. It's build a dam across the valley and store behind it and use the river as a throttle. So that's fine. So far, so good. But the natural flood management stuff we've done a lot with in the partnership, and we're quite good at it. The problem you've got is you've got no control. You're unable to I mean, this is where this whole project fails. You've got no money to incentivize farmers. You've got no powers to intervene, and therefore, you know, what this is a wish list, and at the end of it, you will come up with some suggestions which you can't implement. And you know, some of the things that you've dismissed are actually would be very useful at a small rural scale. So I live in a tiny rural community which would benefit hugely from changes in agricultural practice and agricultural methods, but you are in no position to intervene in those, and you seem to have dismissed them at an early stage. The other thing I'd query is the concept of saturation. I mean, a lot of the flooding takes place not when ground is saturated. It takes place when the surface water is saturated due to compaction. Now, they're two entirely different things. If you were to look at something like Pont Bren and planting trees, you know, you can increase infiltration 60-fold over an area of land. Now, there's plenty of capacity in most flood scenarios. 2007 happened on the 20th of July, 2007, and the groundwater was not saturated. It was very compacted, it was very wet, but that was a summer flooding event. You know, you've got to get your detail right. You know, there's no evidence of saturation in a lot of these flood events. It's compaction and runoff. So you know, this is a fine project, but I suspect it will die and wither on the bush because it fails at the fundamental level that the agency it's got no control on land use in the catchment. And you go back to a Dieter Helm type model, and then you may have, but at the moment it will fail. Has to.
Okay, fair amount to go out there.
If I could just to the first point that you made about the Oxford Flood Alleviation Scheme, so we absolutely still need the Oxford Flood Alleviation Scheme. Upstream flood storage would support the Oxford Flood Alleviation Scheme. When we came up with the plans for the Oxford Flood Alleviation Scheme, there was always the plan that in the future upstream flood storage would be needed to continue for it to continue with climate change and with the predicted expectation for climate change. So it's both are needed essentially. In terms of the changes of agriculture that you mentioned, I think that is something that we are still looking at. It is a part of the list of the natural flood management approaches that we are considering. I do take your point that there are a lot of challenges. We're really aware of some of those challenges that you've lined out for us, but we're hopeful that we can overcome some of those, and hopefully by working in partnership will be a way that we can bring this project forward, and we can include the natural flood management aspects.
I've always hoped I'd play centre forward for England, but reality bites.
Thank you, Vaughan. I'd say we can come back to these points again. Tim.
Thanks. I think again, Vaughan said most of what I was going to say, but just to hold you to the bringing forward some of those things. I agree that you don't want to rush into a £100 million concrete structure to stop London flooding, but a lot of these things actually just requires your endorsement and support, so that we could perhaps let the private finance markets run their course. So if we're going to sell a ton of carbon, it's not a ton of carbon in a Borneo rainforest that's questionably planted or not. It's a ton of carbon that has all the co-benefits that yourselves, and going back to my point I made to Jeremy, Thames water, soil health, or trees linking natural, semi-natural ancient woodlands together. And it was a shame in those co-benefits at the beginning of your slide that you didn't have the link to increased drought resilience as well. And I don't think it may have been on there, but these things go hand in hand. And to Vaughan's point, you don't hit saturation if the water's going down into the aquifer, because those aquifers seem to be going down and down each year. And so I think 2 points. One is, it's great to be working with you, but we need to work with you faster on this. And it's not just about paying out big sums of money per hectare each year, but it's about recognising the value. I reiterate the point that I made to Jeremy, recognising the value of what a farm intervention can have, not just on crop production, but on carbon, on biodiversity, on water, and on water quality, on flood storage and drought resilience. And so let's not wait 7 years for you to decide where you're going to put your concrete structures to do some really simple interventions in field and on stream edges, because those can be done now. And you've got a catchment partnership with a lot of data and a lot of precedent and a lot of examples and case studies of where it's working. We've got a lot of carbon, soil carbon data. We've got the first consortia bid on English Woodland Creation Offer in collaboration with Network Rail. There's a whole heap of firsts in the catchment that you should really be leaning in on, and not just focusing in on hard engineering.
Thank you, Tim. And absolutely. I mean, that's partly why we're here today, and why we want to keep working with you to make sure that we do recognise those opportunities. And I believe we've got a meeting set up with you shortly to start to look at some of those in a bit more detail. So, but yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that meeting.
Cool. Owen.
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, I think my question was kind of already asked, but I just think it's important. But I'm just kind of curious to, it's going to be difficult, I think, from my own understanding, to roll out NFM and flood storage in the future if landowners aren't compensated for it. Essentially, they might be giving up their land for 20 or 30 years to make it a flood area, but they could be using that area of land to create crops and make themselves money. So I'm just kind of interested to know, do you have any idea about how much funding you can give to landowners throughout the Thames in the future, or have you got to that kind of stage yet?
We've certainly started conversations around it, but I can't give you any figures at the minute. But it is something that we've been looking into as to how, what mechanism we would use and how best to do that. But I haven't got any details on it at the minute.
All right. Well, we should definitely keep in touch on that anyway. It's an interesting topic, and one that's definitely needed. So yeah, thanks for your presentation.
Brilliant, thank you. I just wanted to pick up one more point as well on the saturation. I think so I completely accept 2007 was a summer flood. The majority of the flooding that we do get does tend to happen in the winter, and it does tend to happen after the ground has become saturated, because the Thames tends to flood quite slowly. It's not a flashy catchment as you get in some of the places like the Lake District, where the flooding comes down really fast, and that's where we've seen natural flood management can be particularly effective. We're not ruling it out in this catchment. We've just some of the work that we've done already is showing the figures that we've looked at have shown that in this area we do tend to flood when the ground is already saturated. I completely take your point that if you put in natural flood management, then the amount of space in the ground for that water to be held in increases. So there is value in it. It is just one of the limitations that we found in our looking at research so far.
I mean, have you genuinely looked at that? I mean, can you show me the data that shows peak flooding in particularly rural catchments, and show me the groundwater boreholes at that time? I mean, have you actually overlaid those surface water peaks against those groundwater levels? Because I'm afraid, you know, climate change and all that's happening suggests that, you know, that synopsis by you is wrong. I mean, we are going to face more Lake District type events. We are going to face 50 mil of rain in 2 hours. And we are in a catchment which is compacted because of agriculture. And therefore, the soil characteristics and the flood mechanisms here are probably far more akin to the Lake District than you actually appreciate. I mean, if someone will show me those groundwater boreholes and that surface water perturbations, those peaks on graphs for the last 20 years, then I'll withdraw that point. But I think you're wrong, largely. Thank
you. We do have a paper coming out which explains some of the work that we've done. That's going to come out really shortly, so we'll share that with you. And if you would like to see any of the work that's gone on behind it, then yeah, absolutely, we'll have a look, and happy to share what we've done. And remember, your colleagues in groundwater are quite happy to say that the even load is east of the Great Geological Divide and therefore completely different from the rest of the Cotswolds. And that was in terms of its relationship to water quality. So unless the Great Geological Divide is healed, then it remains so. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Mark, you popped up and then sort of went away. So can I come back to you first, and then to Anne, and then Owen?
I was just really to make a quick point. And historically, when the flooding in the Thames catchment has been looked at over the years, there has been recognition that the even load is actually the fastest to rise and respond, is the flashiest catchment actually flowing into the Thames, and therefore a very significant contributor. It's one of the reasons why we gave feedback on the flood risk management plans, expressing considerable concern at the fact that basically the even load catchment was considered not to be low risk. It shows, sadly, a sort of failure of understanding of what is actually driving flood risk in our area. So that's the point I wanted to make.
Okay, thank you. That's really interesting. And I'll take that back to the team and make sure that it has been considered in what we're doing now.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Anne seems to have either had a question answered or disappeared. Owen, you had a further question?
Yeah, so it's just a question on monitoring, and especially rainfall monitoring and groundwater monitoring. So I think from my own understanding, there isn't a whole lot of especially groundwater information on the even load. There might be 2 or 3 points that the EA pick up. So I'd be interested to know, how are you going to figure out groundwater levels and rainwater levels where there isn't much data? And is it possible maybe to roll out some funding with catchment partnerships to find out that information and get that detail that we need to figure out where the rises are happening between groundwater and rainfall? And that might help to have a more effective scheme, I suppose, in the future.
Thank you. I don't know the answer to that question now, but I'll certainly take it back to the team and come back to you on that one. Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks.
Okay. Quick question from me, if I may. Are you in a position at this point to sort of give an idea of what sort of scale of intervention you might be looking at? Sort of how much water do you think you might need to be holding back, and over what period?
I believe it's 40,000 litres cubed, No, I'm not sure about that. There's definitely a 40,000 figure, but let me go back to the team and double check, so that I don't tell you the wrong amount.
Yeah. Okay.
It is, we did an early study where we looked at the amount of water that we thought we would need to hold back to be able to make the difference that's needed to reduce that flood risk. And yeah, there is a figure that the team does know, but let me double check that it's right.
Fine. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, flood risk where?
Across the Thames, so across the Thames Valley. So we're looking. It's flooding that happens along the River Thames essentially, but then any work that we would do upstream would have benefits locally to anything downstream of it. But the combined benefit would be to those living along the River Thames.
So has it been broken down spatially yet to the point? I mean, we're here talking about the even load. Are you at the point yet where we can start to conceptualize what that might mean for the even load catchment or the other catchments in Oxfordshire even?
We're not quite there yet. It's a piece of work that we're doing at the minute is to start to look at where interventions would need to happen, and we hope to be able to share that later this year. But we're not quite there yet.
Yeah.
So can I just get this clear in my mind that the aim of this project is to reduce flood risk on the River Thames, and anybody that gets benefit elsewhere is good, but it's not aimed at reducing flood risk in these catchments?
It's aimed at reducing flood risk across the Thames Valley, and anyone who would be downstream of any intervention would get some level of benefit. The combined benefit would happen further down on the River Thames. But there would be benefit to anyone downstream of any intervention.
But the key receptors, the measure of success is the Thames itself and its valley.
Not entirely. It is everywhere across the Thames Valley that we're looking. It's just that combination would be greatest as you combine the tributaries coming in.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, presumably, the numbers and the way these things work out is that it's the big population centres that you're seeking to protect. It's the Oxford. In our area, it's the Oxford and the Abingdons, but really, it's trying to stop water coming down quickly to London. Ultimately, that's what's going to pay the bills to underpin this. And as you say, the collateral benefit for upstream communities comes from presumably how we design and implement those measures to make sure that we do get all these multiple benefits as well.
Yeah,
but what the Treasurer is interested in is that we don't flood London. I'm sure.
You're heading down the same risky cost-benefit metric, which has held back water quality enhancement for so long, and that's one of the problems, Nick. That centres of population under the CBA model get the biggest bucks, and rural sewage treatment works and rural populations of flooding get not ignored but pushed well down that pile, and that can't be right. And that's one of the reasons why you've got Mogden gets enhanced every time, and there's a tideway tunnel, and sewage works in Oxfordshire is still struggling.
Yeah. Tim, sorry, I don't know, Julia, Lizzie, whether you wanted to come back on that.
I think sorry, Tim. I was just going to say that I think one of the benefits of the Thames Valley Flood Scheme, because it's not situated in one particular local place, means that it can give that wider benefit and it can give that wider flood risk reduction. And so there are communities where we have wanted to do a local scheme and it hasn't been possible for whatever reason. And so there is this opportunity that Thames Valley Flood Scheme could provide some benefit to those areas as well, where local schemes haven't been possible. And that is everywhere. I mean, our study area is everywhere upstream of London. That's the area we're looking at. So that's the area we're looking at the benefits in as well. Okay.
Yeah, I say interesting opportunities with the implementation. Tim.
Back to the numbers. The NFM Studio and all the data that's on the Catchment Partnership website, put together by Dave Gasker and co, to make a very visual scale of what sort of realms we're talking about in terms of flood storage. So it's the sort of tens of thousands of cubic meters for in-channel interventions. It's hundreds of thousands of cubic meters for flow pathways, overland flow interventions, and field corner bunds and so on. And it's millions in terms of tree planting and soil carbon uplift, soil health. I think you've seen that, Juliet, have you, or have you not? You have seen that.
I don't know.
I would share it
I
on my
think
screen.
I have.
But
Yeah, I think I have actually. Yeah, I think I have.
Okay, well, we'll find a way of circulating that. It's a massive old file, so I can't just stick it in an email. It's a really nice piece of work by Atkins that just visualise where interventions can be, and it's all about, you know, it's soil carbon in flat fields up on the top on the plateaus to hold on to that water, and it's identifying all those overland flow pathways and consolidating all that work that's on the catchment partnership
Yeah, I'm
website.
pretty sure I have seen it, and I passed it on to the project team as well to have a look at. But I will double check. But yeah, thank you, Tim. I think it was really interesting.
And
Can I just interact there? We will try and get that up on our website if we can, and then we can do links to it if it is a big document.
Yeah, fascinating. Great. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Anne. Any more questions on there? Thank you. It's a fascinating, huge, challenging issue. As you can tell by the level of questions, it's, you know, there are lots of opinions, lots of ideas, and I think, you know,
yeah, thank you very much.
Challenges, we can also see the opportunities that are here as well. So yeah, do please keep involved with the catchment partnership. Do come back. We'd be really pleased to have an update at some future date when you think that's appropriate.
Thank you. Yeah, that would be lovely. Thank you very much, and thank you
much
for
appreciated.
having us here today.
No, great. Thank you.